Hello, everybody. This is Charlie. This is To Hell and Back, the podcast that I started almost 4 years ago, right around the time the Hurricane Maria happened in Puerto Rico. That's a marker of my memory because right after that, one of my first podcasts for a couple of weeks was to interview a therapist who lived in Puerto Rico. But anyway, and it is, what is it, the 11th of March. It's 6 o'clock East Coast time here in Northampton, Massachusetts. And what's really cool this time is that I have 3 people joining me, 3 colleagues who I consult to about their treatment program and their therapy cases at Clearview Women's Treatment Program in Los Angeles, I guess in Venice.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And which is Venice in Los Angeles, that Venice.
Unfortunately, not Venice in Italy.
That would be nice.
Near the water, like people do in Venice. And they are the 3 of them, which is Nicole Riddle and Kate Roahrig and Ruth Avalos, are all full-time therapists at working at the Women's Treatment Program. It's a residential treatment program at Clearview in Los Angeles. And they've done a lot of DBT therapy and skills training. And Nicole is a clinical leader in the world at Clearview. And I've known her for a long time because I've worked a lot with Clearview over the years. And we were just having a conversation in a recent consultation, a Zoom call, where we were talking about the application of the emotion regulation model and skills to treatment. And we got into it a bit. And then I thought, you know, that's just the topic I was on in the podcast or was heading into. And I thought I thought it'd be really interesting if we all just carried that conversation on here so that those of you who are interested in the real applications of what the emotion regulation model in DBT, which I talked about in some detail in the last podcast. I mean, that like just practical applications that they have come across, that they've used. And so they're going to share that. And we're just going to have a dialogue about that and see if we can all get smarter by the end of this hour about using Marshall Linehan's emotion regulation ideas and model to change emotions. So welcome, guys. It's very nice to have you guys here and not just be totally alone like most of us.
Thanks for having us, Charlie.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Charlie.
Yes, and even though I usually am nervous about what I'm going to say because I'm not sure what I'm going to say in the podcast, I'm less nervous because now I have 3 of them and I don't know what they're going to say either. So it's like only 1/4 of that is me, rather than is me. So it's on them. And we're all using emotion regulation strategies before we start, as I do every week.
Yes.
So what I want to get us going by just some thoughts I've been having literally up to today. Usually when I'm focusing on a podcast or a topic, or even if I'm teaching a certain skill in DBT, my mind gets going on that again. And then I come up with a somewhat different way than I've usually thought of it or it puts it together. So I just want to take about 10 minutes and give some overview that leads up to how would you practically apply this? So I realize in order to get myself organized, I have 3 things to say. The first thing is this. It was a thought experiment that occurred to me today. We talk so much about dysregulation of emotions when we use DBT and how to deal with dysregulation of emotions that we rarely talk about perfect emotion regulation. Like, no dysregulation of emotions. What would that look like? And I thought, I don't usually think about that. So I thought I would think about that. So I'm going to tell you from the perspective of this model of emotions, here would be ideal emotion regulation. Here's how it would go. You know, you'd be going through your day I don't know, you're doing the dishes, or you're walking down the street, or you're sitting in a meeting, or you're like figuring out what to do with your dog who's throwing up in the living room, or whatever it is that's going on. Whatever is going on, we always are regulating emotions. So let's say we had perfect emotional regulation. Here would the idea is that we would be in pretty good balance most of the time. We would have, you might say, a good emotional immune system that's going along pretty well. We get decent sleep. We would, be reasonably well nourished. We would have a reasonable rhythm in our lives between activity and exercise and rest, and then other things we're pursuing. We wouldn't be sick, or if we were sick, we would be handling it in a balanced way, or at least doing what we're supposed to be doing to try to get better. We wouldn't be heavily using substances. So we'd be like at baseline. This is before anything happens. We would be reasonably okay and reasonably balanced in our mind and in our body. With an emphasis on the word reasonably, because never perfectly. And then something would happen. Like I said, maybe we'd break a dish while we're washing the dishes, or the dog would throw up, or we would be walking down the street and we would see somebody coming that we were afraid of, or some car that came close to us driving by and that we were pissed off about that, or something else when we're in a meeting and somebody would say something hurtful to us. Things happen, right? Unless we just cocoon ourselves. And then if we cocoon ourselves, that's what's happening. So things are always happening. Reality is always happening. And so reality comes at us when we're in a certain state of mind and certain state of body. And then what happens is that we have an emotional response to reality. We're afraid. We're disgusted by the dog throwing up, and we're worried about it, and we're upset about it. We're sorry that we broke the dish. We're disappointed. We're frightened about the person walking down the street. Whatever it is, there is a natural emotional response. We aren't like Spock. We are not just void of emotional responses. We are having emotional responses to every damn thing that comes by at whatever level. Maybe it's not a high level. And we aren't really having to think about it. If you're well emotionally regulated, I would think it's mostly happening under the hood, and you don't really have to lift up the hood. It's just, you're just driving along, right? And everything's all right. And what do your emotions do? They they get you to do stuff. They get you to take action, and hopefully if you're well regulated, quote unquote, you take effective action. You respond appropriately to reality. If somebody's walking down the street and they are frightening, truly frightening, and you've had a bad encounter with them before and they have hurt you, then your well-being might be at stake. And so you would have a fear response, and your fear response is completely in touch. It's in touch with reality. That's what it's there for. It's there to get you to do something about it, to keep you so that your genes go into the next generation. It's like it keeps you moving forward. Or if you, these other things, with every one of them, there's an emotional response that gets you to do something. And that's what's called the action urge of an emotion. It's like you run away from something, or if you are doing something that you're ashamed of because it might get you ejected from a community, then you actually are aware of that. You get this bad feeling, and you feel like, well, wait a minute, maybe I better not say anything more about that. Maybe I should keep to myself. Maybe I should not expose this because it's actually going to expose me to alienation from other people. Or maybe I've already done something that alienates other people, and my shame gets me to go apologize, or to gets me to do good works, or gets me to be like to behave myself. And so it keeps me in community. So every emotion has its function, its action, its effective action. There's such a thing as your emotion, if it's well regulated, being effective, getting you to do effective stuff. Okay, so there you go. That would be perfect emotion regulation. We just go along and we're always having emotions, and we're always acting in accord with our emotions, and our emotions are in accord with reality, accurately perceived, and life goes on and we pursue our dreams and what that's it. Here's the problem with that. It's true of nobody. It just doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't happen that way. I don't care who you're talking about. I mean, everybody enters into situations primed by their history, where they've been hurt before, where they've backed off before, where they've learned stuff from other people they care about. They've learned stuff that they keep repeating to themselves. So then they perceive reality with that in mind, rather than with an open mind that's accurately reading reality. We are just constantly, so our biology is primed by experiences. Let's say you've had traumatic experiences, and now you're seeing the guy come down the road who you're afraid of, but actually there's never been any evidence that he's frightening. He's never attacked you before. There's no real reason in reality to think he's going to attack you, but you are convinced he's going to attack you. Why are you convinced he's going to attack you? Not because he's actually in reality acting like he's going to attack you now, but because he reminds you of somebody, or the situation reminds you of some time several years ago when you were out on a street at night and somebody attacked you. And so now that is what you're responding to. You're not responding to this person or this reality or this particular street. You're responding to something that got built into you. You learned it. You were conditioned by your past. Or, you know, somebody comes up and questions what you're doing. Why are you walking on this street? Why are you walking on the right side of the street? Don't you realize you're supposed to walk on the left side of the street? And then that's just input from reality, right? And it might not be very skillful input, or it might be or might not. But actually, let's say that you have a history where people have made you feel very bad about yourself, and you've taken those messages in, and you've told yourself 8,000 times, there's something wrong with me and someone's going to find it out. I always do stuff wrong. Okay, that isn't reality. That's the history of what you learned by previous modeling, previous input, previous experience. So now you are biased and you are programmed. And we all are. So we can't really rely on perfect programming and perfect priming and perfect balance all the time and perfectly accurate reads of reality. We're always inaccurately reading reality here and there, not every minute, but here and there. So what does it mean to have really good emotion regulation? It doesn't mean that you don't ever fall off into these distortions. It doesn't mean that you accurately perceive things all the time, because that's just too high a standard. No one does that, you know, and still has emotions. And if you're just a purely rational person, that's a certain way of regulating emotions. It's actually not taking advantage of the richness of emotions. You're like suppressing emotions in order to not be in emotional pain. That's not emotion regulation in the way I'm talking about. I'm talking about emotion regulation means you actually feel everything. I mean, you feel stuff. And it gets you to do stuff, and that stuff generally works out okay. All right. So what does it mean? I think then, and this is my first main point, is that emotion regulation really means that you're always noticing when you're not emotionally regulating very well. In other words, you're already screwing up in your read of reality. You're already distorting in your way of seeing things. You're already responding to the past instead of the present. And that's just the way life goes. You're just doing that. But some people never realize they're doing that, and they just keep doing it. And they end up banging their heads into things. I mean, they end up doing ineffective things. They end up doing things that are bad for themselves, bad for other people and stuff. And they're in pain, you know, and they don't quite get it. So the second point I want to make is that within the world of DBT, and I think it's more than just DBT, the best antidote, ongoing present antidote, the best immune system, you might say, when it comes to emotion dysregulation, is that you are aware of it, that you are mindful, and you are using, in DBT terminology, DBT speak, as somebody told me today in a group I was running. So, oh, in DBT speak, we would say, and it's true, in DBT speak, and it's sort of funny, but I think it's more than just DBT. We would say mindfulness, being well able to observe actually what's happening as it's happening or just afterwards, is an incredibly valuable skill that some people have, some people learn, you can learn, and it really means that you're keeping an eye on who you are and how you're interacting, and you're keeping an eye on other people, and you're trying to accurately read reality, and you're noticing that actually you aren't always accurately reading reality, so you're always having to kind of reel yourself back in and say, gee, I wonder about that person on the street, for instance. And what you have to do when you start to say, God, I don't know, that person has never hurt me, or I don't know, why am I so frightened of this person on the street? That is a great question, because maybe there's a good reason to be frightened and you just haven't figured it out. Or maybe there's not, and it's from your past. And therefore you're about to walk past the most wonderful person in the universe, walking by who you could have a great friendship with, and you never will, because actually you're terrified of this person because they are the way you perceive them. So it's kind of like observing mindfully what's going on already is the best self-correcting procedure we've got for emotion regulation. And it's why Marsha Linehan called it core mindfulness, because it's core to other skills. It's core to emotion regulation. If you can mindfully notice what's going on with you, inside you, outside you, you know, you scan yourself and say, God, why am I so scared of this person? And then you say to yourself, actually, he walks by here every day, now that I think of it. And he always looks like that. And I've never noticed him do anything that's frightening. But actually, he's reminding me of another situation in my life 10 years ago. But actually, he isn't that situation. In other words, your mindfulness gets you to start talking to yourself in a way that is correcting. It's assessing what is going on here. And that's so smart that it helps you start to calm down a little bit, or at least assess the situation and regulate. So my second point I wanted to make, after talking about how perfect emotion regulation begins with the fact that you have to assume that you have imperfect emotion regulation all the time. And so the second point is that your first procedure, if you want to call it that, the first thing to do is to be mindful of what's actually going on, and be mindful of what's going on inside you, in your body, in your mind, in your thoughts, in your impulses. And notice all that and just scan it, because actually if you do that, probably you'll solve 90% of the problem yourself. You won't need to learn the rest of the skills. That'll already, because I personally think this whole module of skills about emotion regulation just grow naturally out of being mindful of having an emotion. It's just because here's the third point. The third point is that when you are mindful of an emotion, at first, it's just sort of like, oh, there's this person on the street, freak out. Oh my God, I'm scared. I'm in a panic attack. And it's like, I'm going to go run and put my head in the sand. And it's sort of like, okay, that happened. I made it. Thank God. You know, that's it. That's emotion regulation. No, that's not good emotion regulation. It's actually, because you can't regulate, you have to do something extreme like that. So to be good emotion regulation would be, you know what, I'm going to sort of take up the role of observer of myself, observer of my thoughts, observer of my interpretations, observer of my body, observer of my heartbeat, observer of the panic in my stomach, observer of this actual person and what he's actually doing, observer of how my past enters into my present. In other words, if you take the role of an observer, watching yourself and watching what's going on, which is what mindfulness is all about, and you tend to calm down, you tend to you slow things down a little bit, you wake up a little bit to reality, and you might decide, yeah, you know what? I don't think I should come closer to that person. He's been a stranger in this neighborhood and nobody knows him. So actually what is going on? There is something to be wondering about here, but it's more specific than just freak out because he's like somebody from 10 years ago. So emotion regulation is when you actually settle down with your mindfulness into the components, because this is the brilliant thing about this model of emotions, is that it's what you find out. You don't have to know DBT. You find all of these ingredients, all of these components in the model of emotion, if you just stop, look, and listen. If you just sort of settle down and you notice, yeah, because what are you going to find out? You're going to start to think, yeah, what is going on? What is going on in reality versus in my mind? And what is going on in my mind? What are these thoughts, and where are these thoughts coming from? And what's going on in my body? Let me notice that and track that. And what's going on in my impulses? What do I feel like doing? I feel like running and putting my head in the sand and hiding out behind a tree so that this person doesn't see me because they're going to kill me. It's sort of like, so you start to notice these things. And what are these things? These are the components of the model of emotions that Linehan put in this manual. It's like, these are them. So actually, if you just stop, look, and listen and settle down into your emotion, it sort of softens and it breaks into its ingredients. It breaks up into its components. And then when it does that, then you can say, oh, God, I'm really distorting because I actually don't know this person at all and I'm assuming he's terrifying. So now you may need to correct that part of your emotion regulation system, the part that is misinterpreting, or at least it's jumping to a conclusion inappropriately because you don't have enough information. And you realize that and say, maybe I should get some more information. And you've already corrected not only your thinking, you've corrected your whole emotion regulation response. Or maybe you realize that if you run and hide your head in the sand, you're giving into your urge, you're giving into your impulse. And maybe once you recognize, maybe this isn't the best solution to this. Maybe I should sort of stay present and keep an eye on what's happening and act against the urge to run away. And actually I should stay safe but present and interact even with this person. Say, hi, I haven't known you before. Who are you? And maybe have an encounter, which would be to go against your urge, which is another one of the many skills that comes out of this. So in other words, it breaks down into about 10 components that I outlined last week, which are sort of sequential in one way, but actually they sort of all happen at once. So it helps you sort of like put the microscope on your emotional response and keep adjusting your microscope at more and more levels of magnification until you start to actually see it break down into its ingredients. So I'm going to stop there because what we want to do is I've asked Ruth and Kate and Nicole each to just sort of think about how they've used the model or parts of the model themselves, even with themselves or with other people they've known or worked with. Although I've also told them something I always have to keep in mind is that if I talk about anyone I've worked with, I have to sort of significantly disguise that so nobody has to worry that their confidentiality is going to be breached. So let me just ask first, you guys, your response to any part of what I've just been saying, because you teach this stuff all the time, and I just wonder if this perspective makes sense to you, or if it brings in anything different, or it's any different twist on it, or whatever. So anybody can just go ahead.
I love it. Oh, go ahead.
Go for it, Ruth.
Oh, I was gonna say, I love it. Like everything you were saying, Charlie, that's how I like to use the model myself. It's a lot about like the mindfulness piece of just being really aware of like what's going on. Like sometimes I don't even know exactly what I'm feeling. All I know is I'm starting to feel the different parts, the different components. And then that helps me figure out like, okay, something's up. I'm feeling dysregulated. Something's going on. I might not be able to pin down exactly what it is. And that gives me the info to begin starting to address it, like either through skills or whatever it is I need to do in that moment. So yeah, I agree with you. Mindfulness is a huge piece.
Ruth, what tells you it's time to raise that question about your emotional response? Like, when do you need to open, as I put it in a metaphor, lift up the hood? Why? Yeah. When do you know to sort of stop driving and look in the engine?
I think it depends on the emotion. I was thinking of a recent example that Kate and Nicole are aware of this, about like my cat recently had just a bad reaction to anesthesia, and I had a lot of fear come up at that night. And I don't remember thinking, oh, I'm feeling fear now. Like, no, I wasn't thinking that. I remember just feeling all the different parts to it. And I remember for me, what stood out the most was, one, I wanted just to cry and to kind of just hide and kind of freeze. And I knew I wasn't thinking clearly. And I knew that my goal was to problem solve. My goal was to get her the help that she needed. And I knew that
was home by this point. Your cat was at home by this point, or was it the hospital?
She was at home, and she started having like just bad symptoms. Like she was really sick, and it was getting worse. And so as I noticed that, I started wanting to cry, and I started noticing that I wanted to freeze and I wanted to just kind of like hide. I just wanted to not be, I didn't want the situation to be happening in the first place. And I knew that wasn't helpful, because my goal was for her to be okay, for her to get the help that she needed. So that's when I paused to think, and I thought to myself, well, that's not going to be helpful. So I think, to answer your question, like for me, I guess in general, what might stand out for me, and what might cause me to pause to like look under the hood is when I have a goal in mind and then I'm not able, it's hard to reach it. It's hard to accomplish it. So at that moment, my goal was to get her the help that she needed. And I was wanting to do things that was going to make it harder to do that. And so that's when I had to start becoming more aware, like what's going on right now? What do I need to do right now to help that? So. Yeah.
What do I need to do about myself? You mean
about myself? Yeah, and in regards to like the thoughts that I was having, or like the urges to freeze or to hide, or just to cry. And I knew I wasn't thinking clearly, so I knew I needed to pause and like, take some slow, deep breaths to be able to begin focusing again. Yes.
But it started with you recognizing, oh my God, this is not the situation I want. I'm preoccupied with my own fear of what's going on, and I want to manage my own fear, and I want to freeze myself, but my cat's over there. And, and I want to take care of my cat. So it's kind of like I have to take care of myself first so I can take care of the cat.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not perfect. I love that you said that it's not like we're going to be dysregulated. There's no perfect way to regulate, because I still cried. I still was not thinking as clearly as I could have been. I still had moments where I was like, okay, I want to just stop. But then I kept addressing what was currently going on so that I could keep moving forward. So it wasn't perfect. And
because what would be perfect? If we were perfect specimens of emotion regulators, then you would get freaked out by the cat situation, and it would motivate you to only do one thing, which was take care of the cat. I mean, if we were perfect, it would drive you, that anxiety, or whatever you want to call it, or the fear of the cat really not making it, would get you to like do all of this right stuff for the cat. But actually what happens is something gets caught up in you that's based on your biology or something. I don't know what it was based on. Like, what were you afraid the cat was going to die?
Yeah, that's always my biggest fear with her. That something bad's going to happen to her. So that's like my automatic thought was that she's not going to make it. And so
Interesting. So I like that you started with such a, I thought you were actually going to have the example I sort of threw out there that your dog is like throwing up in the living room, but it was like is actually having an anesthesia response. So,
I mean, she did throw up. Yeah, but I mean,
she did throw up.
Yeah, I actually was like, did Charlie know? But did we talk about this in consultation?
Oh yeah, psychic telepathy between California and Massachusetts. Absolutely. I live with 2 dogs, and I've been through that many times. Dogs throwing up, and they only throw up on the rug. On the room.
I know. What is that?
They never just throw up where you could easily clean it.
I know. Yeah.
So what about you, either Kate or Nicole? Any response to sort of this system that I'm talking about, or just any piece of it, or with any example or anything of your own?
Kate, go ahead, because you were gonna.
Yeah. Something you said, Charlie, about like looking under the hood. That's definitely one of the ways that I think about the model, the one that looks almost like a machine, that really kind of complex graph that's in the manual, is that a client brought this up in group several years ago, and it just stuck with me. So I continue to kind of use it in this way, but it does look like a machine, and it's almost this manual that helps you see the interactions and the flow and the movement of the experience that we have internally, and how it influences different components, all these different components are working together and influencing each other. And it's in the part of the manual where you're really increasing insight. So it's almost like the way that I think about it is it really is this user manual. We really are looking under the hood and trying to plug things in to get more insight to see how one part of our experience that we might be more aware of than another can influence that, and vice versa, and see the after effects and all of that. And the other version of the model is more of like, after you understand that, if you have a grasp on how all the different components can happen and kind of work in concert with each other, that you can plug it into the more list version. It's not that you necessarily need to better understand what's happening under the hood. It's just to kind of start charting it for yourself and keeping track of it. So with clients, when they really are having a hard time with emotion regulation, we'll often, when we're starting the work together on becoming more connected with that, we'll talk about it as if it's, hey, you've kind of learned how to regulate your emotions based off of someone else's user manual. The environment you've interacted with has kind of taught you through their own user manual, and it's just not compatible. And so we're going to plug things in and kind of see this different way of how to create your own user manual, kind of rewrite that and better understand it. So when you said that, kind of looking under the hood, it reminded me of those different things and how sometimes I will bring that into session with folks.
I love that. I love that way of doing it. I've never heard it described that way, but you know what it reminds me of, Kate, is that when I don't understand engines very well, like actual engines. I have many times been on the road and things aren't working, so I lift up the hood. I have no idea what I'm looking for. It's just I'm acting the way mechanics act, or people who know what they're doing. So I just like to look under the hood, and I try to look the way they look when they're looking, but they don't know what I'm looking for. And yet I've read things in classes before in physics and stuff where I've learned, here's how an engine works. There's this and there's this and there's this. It's sort of like the DBT emotion regulation model. You spell it out component by component and say, oh, okay, I get that idea. And then you look under the hood and you say, it doesn't look like that at all.
Right.
I mean, it just looks like just one big mess with a lot of wires and stuff. And I don't know what's going to what. And you're supposed to know. I mean, so actually that idea of you see, when I create my own user manual, I feel like I've created my own user manual and I recreate it and I revise it. And it always starts with just, there's reality here. And there's my emotional response to it. And there's what I do with my emotion. It's like a 3-component model. But then if it isn't working out and you look more closely, connected to that emotion in the middle of that model, there's also thoughts. So maybe my emotion is out of whack or isn't in tune with reality because I'm reacting to my thoughts, not to reality. And so now the thoughts are like an add-on. So now I've got an add-on, and then I've got an add-on of all of my traumatic experiences and very painful losses that get triggered automatically, thoughts or no thoughts. They just get triggered in my body if I encounter certain things in reality. So there's these, I mainly think of that the part of the model is the natural flow of things, and then there's the add-ons. And the add-ons are problematic. Like the add-on of my cat is going to die, and I know he's going to die, or something like that, that's been planted in there. Like, what if you never thought he was going to die? You just think he's having an anesthesia reaction. I mean, I've had that with my children many times when they were growing up. They're going to die. Like he's got a headache. He's going to die. I feel some bump in my sternum. I'm going to die. So I'm going to die. He's going to die is always nearby. And so that's an add-on to reality. I mean, yeah, you might die. You're going to die. Someone's going to die. Right? So it isn't like a crazy thought. but it's not the thought that's helpful at the moment, and it's not even real,
Yes.
quite reality. So there's these add-ons that get so I have to build my model a little more detailed than just reality, my emotion, and my action. I mean, I have to add in these other things, and they turn out to be the same things that are in this model. But it might be that the way we should work with people in DBT is we should, Kate should rewrite the manual on this, and she should just say, I give a lot of credit to Marshall Linehan, but I'm gonna do something different here. And so what I'm gonna do is our first thing this week is I want each of you to write down your own model and your own under the hood. How do you work? And start from there, rather than tell everybody to look at this model and then think you know what you're doing. But anyway, I love that. I'm going to use that. I'm just going to, now I know why we're doing this, because I'm going to steal all of your, take it back into my work.
I was also reflecting on when you were describing that, the user manual piece and unpacking all of those components of the model, and how Ruth was describing, all the different things that were going on kind of at once, and what helps to anchor your question about what helps to anchor, like recognizing that you need the recalibration. I think that so many people who have experienced pervasive invalidation don't feel like they have the permission to even stop and check in with themselves in the first place. And I think that even before the mindfulness, the application of the mindfulness skills is also working on some, challenging of myths about the emotions. I think that's also, why that worksheet is in there, of trying to challenge those myths and trying to come up with reframes about what we're allowed to do in our experience of ourselves. So that's something I was thinking about as well, that might be kind of precursor work or alongside.
Well, what I like about what you're saying too is the concept of recalibration, which recently happened with my car, because I had a windshield crack and then I had to have a new windshield, and then the safety system that partly connects to the windshield had to be recalibrated. That was going to take 2 hours or something before they could recalibrate. I was thinking about how you're going along in your life, and just when you think you've got your life calibrated, something happens to your mother or to your best friend or to your dog or your cat, or something happens that really throws you and it's very traumatizing or upsetting. It's kind of like we need a period of recalibration after that, because it's now harder, because that gets thrown into the mix of everything. Someone gives you an assignment at work and you start crying. What does that have? When you're not responding, you're crying because you haven't yet absorbed what happened and had a chance to sort of get your balance again. You guys are undoubtedly working with people, and I'm working with people that are there's going to have to be some recalibrating as the pandemic. Hopefully, the pandemic is going to fade. And that's going to require a lot of recalibrating. Like, let's say you're 20 years old and you were getting ready to finish college and go do something with your life, and now it's a year later and nothing has happened. And the opportunities aren't there that were there a year ago, or that you thought were going to be there a year ago. And the education you've got hasn't been what you expected. And the friendships you were going to make haven't developed. It's sort of like, whoa, you need a whole period. So, the whole society is going to have a period of recalibration and find a balance again. And sometimes the government doesn't help us with that. We have to figure that out ourselves. And so the recalibration idea is really, I think, a very useful, idea. And, it's how they say when you're in an airplane, put your own oxygen mask on before you put your child's oxygen mask on. It's kind of like recalibrate yourself before you try to recalibrate other people. It's like, because therapists get uncalibrated too.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we can model that in moments. I mean, we definitely, especially with the pace and everything here, of being able to say to, anyone in the environment, whether it's a client that we're working with, or, you know, each other, what have you, I need to do the stop skill. And I'll be right back. You know, always promising to come
You have to
back.
say what the stop skill is, because a lot of people who listen to the podcast don't know the DBT skills. So
Got it.
What are you
The
talking about?
DBT speak. So the stop skill is from the distress tolerance module. And it's the idea, it really is mindfulness in essence. It's the idea of being able to, the S is stop, take a step back, observe, and perceive mindfully. And the idea with that is it's really allowing for that pause. And again, I go back to the permission piece that I think societally we're always taught, you know, who can speak the fastest and who can do this the quickest, and, you know, what have you, and you don't need to take breaks, or if you take breaks that looks weak or what have you, and trying to move away from those myths and really allow ourselves to use that stop skill to take that pause.
You know, the other thing you said that I thought was interesting is if you're trying to recalibrate or something, whatever we mean exactly by that, is that if you have been invalidated a lot in your life, you might actually not know what true north is, you know, so to speak. You might not really know what it is to be calibrated, because you've been responding to an invalidating environment your whole life. And so you never really found home. You never found a home, a ground that you were comfortable with. Because what I was just thinking, that if you're recalibrating yourself, it kind of has an assumption built into it that you will know what it is to be recalibrated, or to be back in shape, or to be back on the ground, or to be back in balance. You'll know that. But actually, there's people who don't know that. They don't know what that would be like. So that it's the recalibration is, I mean, calibration and recalibration, I mean, it would be two different things. The people, you know, I was just remembering what one of the early years of my knowing Marcia Linehan is that I forget whether it was a conversation or a training or something she wrote, but it always stayed with me, where she said that that when she set out to work with people with borderline personality disorder, who were emotionally dysregulated a lot of the time, and for very good reason, but they really had trouble coming back to center or true north or recalibrating, whatever we call it. She said she thought if it had worked, the whole manual would have just been mindfulness. That actually, because mindfulness does help you recover, it helps you discover, it helps you see what's going on, it helps you wake up to reality, it helps you calm down, it helps you be aware of the influences on you. I mean, all these things, it's like brilliant. It's a brilliant thing. It's sort of like Thich Nhat Hanh, one of his first wonderful little books, The Miracle of Mindfulness, that it is a miracle. And Linehan would talk about how if only that had been enough all by itself, that's all she would have taught. But actually, she said, these people have had such dysregulation in their lives that they can't just use mindfulness to get there. They need a whole instruction manual about what to do. So I sort of think that the emotion regulation model is kind of what mindfulness would automatically do if you already had it in you to get yourself back on track. It breaks it down into now when it comes to in your interpretations, let's check the facts about whether your interpretations are a good match of reality or not, and do something about that. If you're carried away by your traumatic responses and you're doing things that aren't very helpful, maybe you can turn around and act opposite that urge. And then she gives like a many step, here's how to do that. So it's kind of like she just breaks down every little thing that you need to do. And sometimes if one doesn't understand why that's there, it can feel like just a whole lot of instructions. It can be a real turnoff. And that whole diagram can be a turnoff because it doesn't really look like the engine. You know, it doesn't feel like the engine. It's like, what is this? This is not how I work, all these boxes. So it does, that's why I like the building your own user manual, being a great concept. Like make your own scrapbook of skills.
It's been really funny over the years, how we've shifted how we teach this, because just like you said, Kate and I have been in group so many times where, you know, you turn the page, or we've drawn that on the whiteboard, with much to my chagrin, like before a group would get started, you're like standing there for 10 minutes, like, oh God, am I gonna do this right? And then the clients and us, everyone's dysregulated by it, and nobody wants to look at it. It's like total avoidance. Like everyone's just like, oh. And so we actually started teaching it in kind of two parts, in terms of doing the model picture diagram as, you know, as it's intended, and then taking the homework version, the homework worksheet, which is the written in language steps, and giving the clients an example prompting event and asking them to pretend that this is true. We're going to tell them what the prompting event is, pretend that it's true, and then write down, you know, what's happening for you as it goes in the model, but in that list form. And the other funny thing is that we've given the example of going to Disneyland, and I swear it has the strongest response in like these really divergent, polarized reactions, even more than the idea of swimming with sharks. Like people are like, you can see it.
You tell
Sorry?
people, you just tell people, imagine you're going to go to Disneyland, or you tell them, hey, guess what, pack up, we're going to Disneyland.
Yes, like we're going to Disneyland, we're going on a field trip. And you can see the model, you can see it happening, right, Kate?
Yeah, we let it like sit for a minute after we announce whatever it is, and then we let them know it's not really happening. We just want to like take a minute to take it.
I love that. You know, I think, and then, because then what you're starting with is a real response. You're not starting with inculcating this boxy diagram, all of which is useful, but it isn't useful in itself because it's actually dysregulating to even look at it. I mean, it's sort of, but if you're looking at it because you've just had a response like Disneyland, how disgusting, whereas the person next to you just had the feeling of Disneyland, I'm so excited. It's like, oh, all right, let's diagram these two emotional responses. What was your interpretation? What was your action urge? What was your expression? And you really, I think that's another thing, like that'd be like building your own. So you got to start with your own response, actually looking at the engine, not looking at the diagram about the engine. I think that helps. You know, there was a way of teaching in a different module once, and I forget if I've ever told any of you guys this, but in starting to teach about interpersonal skills and how to be skillful in asking for what you want, or be skillful in saying no to people, all the fabulous skills in this manual for that, is that I used to start that group by having my co-leader and she was a woman named Cindy that I used to teach with a lot. And I would start the group, and there'd be many people sitting in a circle, and we're all looking at this book, and we're getting started and I'm saying, okay, we're going to talk today about interpersonal skills and how to ask for what you want stuff. 2 minutes later, Cindy walks in, and it just seems like she's late, but it was staged. And she walks in and sits down, and then she opens her book and she starts saying, okay, guys, good to see you all. Today, we're going to talk about interpersonal skills and asking for what you want. I said, Cindy, we just did that. I just started. I'm teaching today. And then she said, no, you're not. Well, you and I agreed. I'm teaching today. I said, but you walked in late. I mean, what do you expect? She said, well, big deal. You've never been late in your life? And then she's like, so no, I'm prepared. You and I agreed the other day. I said, we did not agree to that. We agreed that I was going to do it. And we got into a battle that went up and up and up. And you could see the clients in the group going with their eyes getting bigger, like, oh my God, the world is, we got very intense about it. And then we stopped. And then I stood up next to a whiteboard and I said, can anybody say, was there anything skillful that Cindy did in trying to get to be able to teach? And then I wrote everything down. is there anything she did that wasn't so skillful? What about me? Is there anything that when I said no to her, was there anything skillful? Was there anything? And then we're starting with a real example. And then people can really like get their mind around the example and see, oh, this is why we need this, is that Charlie was so dysfunctional in the way he said no, that they'll never have a relationship. They'll just have fights, you know, and things like that. So it's what you did was sort of the equivalent of that with emotion. You created trouble on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
As John Lewis would have said, good trouble.
Good trouble. Yeah.
You created good trouble in the service of learning this. You got an emotion going, and then you can look at it. It'd be very interesting following up the idea of having everybody build their own user manual. Is that if you had, once that happened, you don't jump right to teaching the model as Linehan developed it. You then have everybody diagram what happened, and I don't know what would come out of that. People would come up with different things. Some people wouldn't know what to say, but you maybe have to structure it a little bit and say, okay, I want each of you to write a little flow chart, or a little with arrows or whatever you need to show here's what just happened, and then see how theirs come out. Because sometimes if you do something like that, you find that actually it's just common sense. And then you look at the manual and you look at what they did, and there's a lot of overlap, which then builds on what they already know, rather than have them have to learn a totally new thing, which actually they sort of know in their own language anyway.
I really like that idea. I really do. Even if there's blanks, like, or even if they're not quite sure, what have you. And I think that also gives a sense of efficacy, and kind of reclaiming, like, understanding what's going on for oneself, as opposed to that, you know, kind of having it then not just mirrored by the environment, but kind of forced upon. So
right. And you could you could have people work in twos, in little teams. Okay, you guys are going to work in twos for like 10 minutes. And you can call on us if you want for help, or you can just do it totally yourself. Come up with your way of explaining what just happened, your model, what happened just now. And then you'll see what comes of it. And then you're starting with them rather than starting with yourself, and seeing what they make of it. I've done that with distress tolerance skills, where I'll say, I want each of you to think about an event that was really terrible or difficult in your life. It's very challenging, and it was hard to get through, but you did get through it. Now I want you to write down everything you did to tolerate the distress and get yourself through. And then they all work for a while, and then I go up to the whiteboard and say, and when we start making a list of everything they say, and they said, well, I found that I had to accept the reality of it. Okay, that's a good one. I found that I was distracting my mind in order to. I had to calm myself down. I sort of just breathed for a while. I told somebody how I felt. And you get all of these lists of things, and you say, we didn't even need Marshall in a hand. And you guys, you did it. Like, I mean, you just got like 75% of the teaching of this entire module just now. This was fantastic. Do you want to learn any of the rest, or do you want to move on? You know, no, now that we've said our piece, let's see what Marshall Linehan said. And then it's like, that's sort of like, I guess we're talking about it, just a different way of teaching that maybe all of us have come across in different modules, but to start where people are at. And that's the hardest with this module. It's the hardest because of this boxy diagram, which is actually brilliant, but it actually doesn't look brilliant when you look at it. It just looks like, oh my God, this is not me. I mean, this doesn't look like me, you know? And so you really have to work hard to realize that this has in it just like, as I went over last week in the podcast, like 10 different factors that all work together towards creating an emotion. And if you want to regulate the emotion better, if it's not a well-regulated emotion, here's 10 areas where you can intervene. But to do that, you have to like really feel like it's worth it, and you know what it is, and you probably shouldn't start with 10 because it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
It's just too much cognition.
I feel like my anchor, because I never realized, when I was younger that I was using this model. But I think essentially it was that my anchor has often been body sensations, both on the left. The model has two like long rectangular, kind of parts of it. And the left side are the things that happen, in our kind of automatic nervous system piece. So it's not necessarily things that we actually fully have control over necessarily, like our heart rate and, butterflies in your stomach or what have you. And then on the right-hand side, it has, kind of the body sensation things that are more kind of visible to the world, like smiling or frowning or laughing or how we kind of behave with our body. And I definitely am prone to rely on my experience of those kind of sensations to be able to let me know, oh, there's something going on that I need to check in with myself about.
Yeah.
And it's funny to reflect back on it after all these years of, learning about DBT, teaching DBT, and thinking about that's really just been my natural go-to for so long.
But I think you must have something that adds into that, because if let's say you felt sort of queasy in your stomach, it might be the same feeling in your body if you were about to go on a date with somebody that you really wanted to meet, but you were nervous about meeting them, and you were excited but also scared, and that could be queasy in your stomach. It could be the same feeling you get when you're sick and you're going to throw up pretty soon, and you're trying to not throw up. It could be the same feeling you get when you sit down to dinner at somebody's house and they're serving something that you've never seen before, and it's like, oh my God, I have to eat that. I mean, you can get the same queasy in your stomach in all these. So you may start grounding yourself there, but then you have to look to your context. And it's like, oh, I'm not queasy in my stomach right now because I'm going on a date with somebody that I'm excited about. I'm queasy because I'm about to have to eat something I've never seen before.
Right.
Oh yeah, it's what I do when I drink coffee too fast. Because when I drink coffee too fast, my heart, my breathing gets out of whack. Like I start breathing really shallow and I just can't get like good breaths in. And then usually for me, that's a sign that I'm feeling really anxious. And so that's when similar with what Nicole just said, like I'll pay attention to my sensations and I'll notice like my breathing's weird. What's going on? So I'll pause and I'll ask myself, like, what did I have coffee today? If I did I drink it too fast?
And when you do that, Ruth, I think that that's where you're, in DBT speak, you are activating your observer, your self-observer, because even to be asking that question, oh, am I feeling this because of this or because that, suggests that there's another part of you that's tuning in and watching. And that's the most important thing. And that's the thing that people have been invalidated a lot. They don't think they have that. And so they have to look to other people to see what's going on. They can't look to themselves. Right. But if you can ask, I mean, I think, we'll stop in just a moment now. I think it's been the full hour. But I think there's this one emotion that isn't even listed in the book of the emotions. The 11 emotions that are in the skills manual that Linehan goes over in great detail. She leaves out the emotion of interest. Interest which has the action urge of curiosity. And it's kind of like to bring in the emotion of interest in the middle of another emotion can be a really useful thing, like help the person line up with their curiosity rather than line up with their fear or line up with their rage, or like, okay, well, I understand that you're really pissed off at that person, but I wonder if you're at all curious about how that happened or who that is or what your response is or whether it reminds you of something. And then you've activated another emotion, but you're also getting someone to observe themselves. It's something I haven't played with enough in my mind to say anything more than that about it. Hey, I don't like to go past time because people count on, if they're going to listen, they listen for an hour. Some people listen for a minute and then they leave probably, but I do want to thank the three of you because, you know, I invited you here and you like threw yourselves in, and I really appreciate that, you know, the skill of willingness. Nobody seemed to get really willful while we were talking. And it wasn't exactly like, you know, I wasn't like Oprah, and you guys aren't like Megan or what's his name?
Harry.
Very.
But it's still an interesting conversation, and I really appreciate it, and it advanced my thinking, and I hope someone listening got something out of it. But thanks very much, all three of you, for doing this with me.
Well,
Of
thank you,
course.
Charlie. It was fun. It was
It was
definitely
fun.
fun.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right, you guys, I go into the evening now, but in California, you probably have to go back to work.
Yep.
Yes.
Good to see you guys.
All right.
Good tune.
Good to
Bye.
see you. Bye.